What's up guys, you're watching Live by TCG. Quick video today. I want to make this one way shorter than the last video on Tron, which was like an hour. This is going to be much quicker, I think. Just a small update to one of my favorite decks in Pauper, so this is Tortured Existence. Recently, you can check out my other video on this. I switched from the black-green version of the deck to Jund. For a better choice of spells. Being able to play Faithless Looting in this deck is really strong, and there is a way to make it work with the lands that are available to make the three colors run pretty smoothly. Obviously it's not super fast in terms of getting all those colors, but it's not a super fast kind of aggro deck, so it works out okay. So what new cards have been added to the deck from recent sets, specifically Ikoria and Jumpstart. So we'll talk about the lands quickly first. I have 6 swamps, mountain and forest, and then 4 Ash Barrens to search for those basics, and then 4 Rakdos Carnarium as some additional card advantage and mana fixing. And then the other lands used to be the tap lands from like Fate Reforged and Khans of Tarkir, the come into play tap ones that gain life. So I have those here, the 2 Jungle Hollow, 4 Bloodfell Caves. But now with Jumpstart you can play Thriving Moor and I forget what the red one's called, Thriving Cliffs maybe, instead of these. So against aggro decks, maybe the not gaining a life is a bit of a drawback, but in a 3-color deck, having a land that can come into play, similarly it comes into play tapped, but rather than Bloodfell Caves, if you play like Thriving Moor, it doesn't have to be just red. It can be red or green as the secondary color. So obviously that's a very useful kind of flexibility to have in a deck that is 3 colors. So I think that's a pretty big upgrade to the deck. What I would do is play, so instead of Jungle Hollow and 2 of the Bloodfell Caves, you play 4 Thriving Moor. So that's the black one. And then for these last 2 slots, you could either leave them as Bloodfell Caves, play the Thriving Cliffs in this slot instead, or you could even play 1 more Swamp and then play like 1 Thriving Cliffs, just because you think that with these new lands, like the mana is just that much better that you can afford to play another basic. That's the direction I would look. But I haven't had a chance to test that yet because the cards have not been released for very long, and they're not here in paper yet either. So yeah, that's the talk about the mana. But then also from Ikoria we have some more useful creatures we can play. So in terms of the spells, 4 Tortured Existence, of course, that's stock. Then we also have 4 Faithless Looting, very strong, basically the reason to play red in the deck. Then 4 Terminate as removal, just extremely flexible, all-rounder removal effect. Then before I was playing 4 Thrill of Possibility, which is like a Tormenting Voice but instant. Now I'm playing 2 Thrill of Possibility and what should be 2 Lightning Axe. So here's a Lightning Axe. It's 1 mana red instant. As an additional cost to cast it, you discard a card or pay 5 mana, and it deals 5 damage to target creature. So the reason why I switched 2 of the Thrill of Possibilities for these 2 Lightning Axe is because the deck was just a little bit slow at playing to the board. when you have 2 mana madness effects that you're trying to get value out of from your discard spells, you don't want to have to be paying 2 extra every time to pay 2 mana for the Thrill of Possibility and then 2 mana to madness your Grave Scrabbler, for example. Like, that's just a bit too slow. So paying only 1 extra mana to activate your madness effect and also being able to deal 5 damage to a creature to stabilize the board is very strong. I didn't want to play this card at first when I was testing all 4 Thrill of Possibility, because in some matchups, maybe very controlling ones, like dealing 5 damage to a creature is not an effect that's useful. But I think those matchups are like a minority enough that it's okay. And against those kind of like very hard control decks, they're sort of very, very rare. Like Tron's a bit of an anomaly in that sense, but you can normally grind them out with your TE regardless. So again, it's not too much of a problem. But when you're playing against like Affinity or Stompy or something like that, like 1 mana, 5 damage is a very valuable effect to have. So I'm happy I made that swap. So just to quickly reiterate, 4 Torch Existence, 4 Faithless Looting, 4 Terminate, 2 Thrill of Possibility, and 2 Lightning Axe is the spells. And then the interesting part of the Tortured Existence deck, of course, is the creatures. And that's where we have the additions from Ikoria. So the old creatures in the deck, 2 Spore Frog, just to help versus very aggro things. So Stompy or Boggles or Heroic or Slivers, things like that. 3 Golgari Brownscale and 2 Stinkweed Imp as the dredge package. 3 Crypt Rats as a way to clear the board and as a threat against the opponent's life total as well. And then 4 Grave Scrabbler and 2 Gorgon Recluse as both value madness from the Grave Scrabbler in particular, and then Gorgon Recluse can also be like a value madness creature, but it's also like a good blocker / removal effect, and it's a pretty resilient attacker as well. So just but you want to play once you've decided to play Tortured Existence, you need to play like madness creatures to get good value off that Tortured Existence. But once you have madness creatures in your deck, you don't want Tortured Existence to be the only enabler for those madness creatures, because otherwise they'll be dead cards too often. So then you have to play like some more discard outlets. But then like once you've done that, you want to play like a few more madness creatures to make sure you're consistently getting value of your discard outlets. So like in the end, you end up playing like quite a high number of madness creatures and quite a high number of discard outlets. And I've actually added 1 more. So I'm playing 1 Basking Rootwalla as well. It looks very weak, you know, it's just a 1/1. Decks that play this card, I mean, a long time ago when you're talking about like blue-green madness and stuff, it was like a sort of decent creature just on its own. But in recent memory, people sort of only consider this card just for the fact that it's free when you discard it. So, you know, you can trigger your Vengevines or whatever with it. But actually, when you have the green mana to activate the ability, 3/3 is pretty strong in Pauper. It becomes bigger than Ninja, becomes bigger than Skyfisher, becomes bigger than all of the Stompy 2/2s. Like, it's actually quite a solid card in its own right. And it's very cheap to like recycle it onto the board with Tortured Existence. For a while, I actually tested, I cut like 1 Grave Scrabbler and I had a second wallet. I think that's like a perfectly reasonable choice as well. I think it's very close. Overall, like Grave Scrabbler is just a bit better value like in the early game when you're trying to dig through your deck with looting and stuff. So only play 1 Rootwalla, but I could easily see myself going back to playing 2 Rootwalla and 3 Scrabbler again. But I don't think you want more than like 7 madness creatures, because you just brick your hands too much. The sort of chain that I described before, where you have the feedback loop of like you having discard outlets makes you want more dredges, having more discard outlets makes you want more madness creatures, which makes you want more discard outlets. Like that stops after a certain point. Because if you open your hand and it's like all madness creatures, it just doesn't do anything. Whereas if you had like a few Madness creatures and at least like a Terminate or something that did something by itself, that would be better. So, you know, there's a cap on how far you can take that, and I think this feels good to me. Something like 7 Madness creatures. So yeah, the Rootwalla is actually pretty good, I think. But that's not a new card, obviously, and that's the whole reason why I made the video, like what new cards are we adding to the deck. So previously, you'll remember that the deck played Monstrous Carabid. Let me find you a copy of that to show. This guy. So 5 mana 4/4, must attack if able. But the important part of why the deck played it was the hybrid cycling. Having a creature that you can just get into the graveyard is good with here. Being able to spend red mana to cycle it is important because you have the Carnariums in your deck. Remember, all of your black mana you can use for Tortured Existence activations. But if you're tapping your Carnarium, you're going to have some red mana left over. And what are you going to do with that? You can't spend that on a Tortured Existence activation. So having a card that can cycle for red mana is really good. And you didn't really play it as a 4/4 very often. Sometimes you could do that just sort of like in the late game where you'd already taken over, just as a way to sort of finally finish off the opponent. But yeah, that mode was not really too important. It's mostly in the deck just as a way to have a cycler, because it lets you dig through your deck quickly with dredges, and it lets you cantrip off your Grave Scrabblers. It's just a very useful effect for the deck to have. But I'm not playing any of these anymore because we have a card from the new set, Ikoria, Drannith Stinger. 2 mana 2/2 creature. Importantly, it has the similar effect as the Monstrous Carabid. Monstrous Carabid can cycle for hybrid black-red. Drannith Stinger can cycle just for 1 generic. So in this deck, it's almost the same. One situation that has come up for me before is you have a hand with Ash Barrens and Rakdos Carnarium. So on turn 1, you play the Ash Barrens, and then you make 1 generic and you cycle your Drannith Stinger. Then on turn 2, you can float 1 mana, play your Carnarium, and then bounce your Ash Barrens, and then use the floating mana to cycle it. So if you do that sequence and you play your Ash Barrens on turn 1, this wouldn't be able to cycle a Monstrous Carabid because you need either black or red, and Ash Barrens only makes generic mana. So that's nice. And of course, you have the 1 basic forest in the deck as well, and that can't cycle the Carabid, but it can cycle the Drannith Stinger. That sometimes happens as well. So yeah, that's a minor upside for Drannith Stinger, right? It's just a bit easier to cycle. But the more important thing about Drannith Stinger is it's just a 2 mana 2/2 is better than a 5 mana 4/4. You can play it down early. It blocks like a Burning Tree Emissary or a Blinder of the Depowers, anything like that. Just being able to do that is really so much better than Monstrous Carabid, which you can't even cast until like turn 5 at the earliest anyway. That's really all there is to it. In the late game, when you're trying to like finish off the opponent, it's almost as good as Drannith Stinger is almost as good as Carabid anyway, because Carabid is 5 mana for 4 power. This is 2 mana for 2 power, and you can usually generate a situation where you spend all your mana and you just spew out a bunch of creatures, right? Like this is 2 mana for 2 power. This is 2 mana for 2 power. Well, I guess you pay a mana for TE, and you madness this. So you spent 3 mana, you got 2/2, and then you return this, and then you pay 2 more mana, and you got another 2/2. So you spent 5 mana, and you got 4 power worth of dudes, right? Which is the same rate as this. But because it has the option of being played for only 2 mana on its own, and it cycles for cheaper, and very occasionally the triggered ability does something. Like you play one down and then you cycle another one and you ping your opponent for like a little bit of damage. That sometimes matters, but not really. The main upside of it is just the fact that it's a bear. It's a 2-mana 2/2 creature, which is much better than a 5-mana 4/4. So that's the one new card we're playing. And if you already knew how the deck worked, this won't really surprise you at all. It's just a very sensible inclusion. Pretty clear upgrade for the deck. In the past, I was playing 4 of the Carabid. Now I'm only playing 3 of this guy. The reason why I cut down one cycler is just I found myself spending too much mana early, just churning through my deck and not doing anything. I didn't want to have so many slots on my deck just dedicated to what a lot of players refer to as air, just like empty space that you just have to spend mana to churn through to try and find cards that do things. You only really need to have one at any point, just so you can return it with TE or return it with Scrabbler and just keep cycling through it. Like, you don't need to have access to multiple copies to do that. And I've seen some people that have like so many more, like they're playing like 6 or 7 copies in total of Stingers and Carabids, and it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't see the point at all. Like, just give yourself some more options by having other cards in your deck that do stuff, which is why I have things like the Gorgon and these instead. So that's how I feel about the cyclers. So that was the first new card, the Drannith Stinger. And then the last 2 cards, so you've seen 58 cards so far. 2 copies of Cavern Whisperer. So this card is a little bit confusing, and I assume you've heard, if you're watching this video, you know how the mutate mechanic works, but I'll quickly try and explain it. So it's kind of like Bestow, like the Theros creatures that could turn themselves into auras. So say you have a creature in play and you have the Cavern Whisperer in your hand. So if you just cast this card, normally it's 5 mana, 4 and a black, and it's a 4/4 menace, and that's all it does. But it also has the mutate ability. So from your hand, you pay the mutate cost, and you cast it as a spell targeting a creature. So like similar to Bestow or just any generic aura. Then it will come into play, and it will mutate onto the creature that you targeted, and then you can choose to put it on top or underneath the creature that you targeted, and then it will become like a stack. So the mutated stack has the power and toughness of the thing on top and the abilities of the thing on top plus everything below. So that was kind of confusing. So to sum it up, the mutate cost on this card is a 4 mana, 3 and a black, and when it mutates, it has a trigger that makes your opponent discard 1. So that's like a Ravenous Rats, and then because 4/4 is bigger than all the creatures in your deck, the Cavern Whisperer will go on top. So it's now a 4/4, and your opponent discards a card from the trigger. Whenever this mutates, your opponent discards 1, and now it's a 4/4 with menace, and it's considered the object that was already in play. So if this Grave Scrabbler could attack, like if it didn't have Summoning Sickness, then the mutated stack won't have a Summoning Sickness either. So all of these things are part of why the card is good. So when I first saw it, I thought, this card, not really that great at all. It's just kind of like a combination of an Unholy Strength and a Raven's Crime. And that's not really a very good deal for 4 mana. Because most of your guys have like 2 power or so. So they're only really getting like +2/+2. And then your opponent discards 1, or you're like, yeah, that's okay, but you're paying 4 mana for it. Like, it doesn't seem so great. But the reality is that when you have so many of these like weenie creatures in your deck, oftentimes they like can't really, there's no situation where they can, that you often end up in situations where these small creatures can't profitably attack anyway. So like they might as well, or block for that matter, so they might as well not even exist. Effectively they have no power, is what I'm trying to say. So like then once you put this down on it, now it does matter, because 4 power is a lot more than 1, or it's a lot more than 2. And it also has menace, which makes it very hard for the opponent to block. And if these could already attack, now this can attack straight away. So what this feels like a lot of the time is a 4 mana 4/4 haste menace. When it enters the battlefield, your opponent discards a card, and all of those things together is actually a pretty good deal for 4 mana. Like against Monarch, for example, like they might play Palace Sentinels down, and they think that they're safe because, you know, they have a blocker for your Grave Scrabbler or whatever. But then suddenly you play this, they discard 1, then boom, and now it has menace, so like they can't block. Versus decks like Tron, like this can be a lot of pressure suddenly. And the fact that it does the discard effect when it comes into play means that it's like a pretty good grindy card as well. It's not just like a super aggro threat that's bad against removal. So how this works against removal is that if you mutate the spell like this and your opponent kills the target in response, this still enters the battlefield. It won't have the mutate trigger, so your opponent won't discard a card, and it won't have haste, of course, so it can't attack. But at least you get your 4/4 menace. And then if they let the mutate happen, and then they kill it, you lose the whole stack. But in that case, the enter the battlefield trigger will have resolved. So your opponent discarded a card, so you don't get 2 for 1 in that case either. And that's pretty important to consider as well. But just the fact that it gives this deck this kind of like sudden attacking angle is really valuable, I find, in a lot of different situations. And the fact that it gets all the abilities from the thing underneath it is actually quite relevant sometimes, because if you mutate onto Rootwalla, which is nice, right, because this creature comes into play for 0 mana effectively, so you really do feel like you're getting a 4 mana 4/4 haste when you mutate this way. It keeps the +2/+2 ability from the Rootwalla underneath. So now suddenly it's a 6/6 when you attack and you pay 2 mana. That really kills the opponent really fast, and it also makes your Whisperer bigger than things like Mega Angler. That's really nice. The other tricky thing you can do with it is when you mutate onto Crypt Rats, now it's a 4/4 creature with the Rats ability, so you can activate up to 3 damage per turn on every creature. But of course this has 4 toughness now because it keeps the toughness of the thing on the top, so it won't die. So every turn you can Rats for 3, untap, Rats for 3, attack. So it's like a repeatable board wipe, and it also bolts the opponent and you're attacking. So some matchups it's a little bit hard to do that, obviously, because playing a 3-drop rat and then mutating onto it is like a big investment. But if your opponent's tapped out, or like you know that it's a deck where they don't have much removal, like elves, that can also be a pretty strong play as well. Having a 4/4 Crypt Rats that just sticks around to wipe the board every turn. So yeah, so those are the 3 things that have upgraded the deck: the Cavern Whisperer, the Drannith Stinger, and the Thriving Lands. I haven't got a sideboard figured out for this yet. One thing that I'm considering is that the Thriving Lands might make Wickerbow Elder more viable. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Let me just grab some water. Yeah, because before I didn't want to play Wickerbow Elder in the Jund version because the green mana is only just a splash, and you really want to have double green available so you can activate Wickerbow Elder in the same turn that you cast it. But with the Thriving lands being able to fix for green more reliably, you might be able to play Wickerbow Elder in 3 colors. So that's pretty good. And I also want to see how it shakes out, like how valuable Artifact Hate is versus Tron, with how their deck works now, without maps and more relying on the Bonder's Ornament. So that's something I want to look at as well. Yeah, so like the thing with this deck is it's like a little bit tricky how much you want to sideboard, because you have like yeah, so like when you have spells like this, so you have the 4 Terminate, the 2 Cavern Whisperer, the 3 Crypt Rats, and the 2 Spore Frog. These are all cards that sort of do their thing on their own. Cavern Whisperer needs support, obviously, like you need to have things to mutate onto, but like in general, these are just sort of like generically powerful cards. But when you look at stuff like Drannith Stinger, Gorgon Recluse, Grave Scrabbler, the Dredges, yeah, so the cycling creature, all the madness creatures, and I guess the Dredges as well, and then also the lightning axe, the thrill, and the looting. TE I guess as well, but you're not obviously thinking about that when you're sideboarding because you're not even boarding that out. Like if you board out, like you probably don't board out your dredge creatures in most matchups because that's an important part of how your engine works. Like you're probably not boarding out looting either in any matchup because that's like also how your engine works. Like you need to dig through your deck to find your pieces and discard cards. Like it's just part of how your graveyard deck functions. So you're not really ever boarding that out. And then, like, if you bought Drannith Stinger, like, it doesn't really do anything. But, like, if you bought it out, then your Grave Scrabblers become a lot worse. If you bought out your Madness cards, then these become a lot worse. Your Lightning Axes also become worse. If you bought out your Lightning Axe, then your Madness cards become worse. Like, it's all part of this engine that's sort of, like, very tightly connected. So you only have like a limited number of cards that you can quote unquote like freely board out, and in a lot of matchups you don't want to board these cards out anyway because of how good they are. So it often doesn't feel like you have so many slots to work with when you're sideboarding. And you need to figure out like how much you can get away with. Like, can I cut like the Rootwalla and like 1 Lightning Axe or something and like have my Madness cards still all work together okay? When you're building the sideboard for this deck, that's the kind of problem you have to solve. So I haven't figured all of that out so far yet. But I am glad, because one of this deck's most problematic matchups before was Tron, specifically how they could wreck your board quickly with the Nova Horror before you got set up. And now, because their mana is worse, without Matt, Fast and Rovers are less likely, and to the point where some people aren't even playing it main deck anymore. So that could greatly improve not only that matchup for this deck, but also the place of Tortured Existence in the metagame in general, because that was like by far your worst matchup in the format. And so it'll be very interesting to see how that all works out. The other last little Tortured Existence piece of insight I have is that the new card from M21, Llanowar Visionary, 2 and a green for a 2/2 elf. When it enters the battlefield, it will draw a card, and it has the Llanowar Elf ability, so it taps for a green mana. In the strictly black-green version of the deck, I think that card's very strong. One issue, or the main issue I have with the black-green version, is that Grave Scrabbler is a very awkward card in it, because there's just no good discard outlet in green-black except for Tortured Existence itself. You're slightly better at finding it because you have Commune with the Gods, but it's not a reliable enough way to find discard outlets to have Scrabbler be good. So I really hate playing Grave Scrabbler in the strict black-green version, but what the new card allows you to do, Llanowar Visionary, is to have a creature that fills that role. Like, you can just play it for value in the mid-game without any setup. Like, you don't have to discard it to a Lightning Axe or a Faithless Looting, right? You can just play it, no problem. Then it draws a card, replaces itself. 2/2 body, pretty strong. You know, it can block a ninja or a lava runner or lots of different things. And then also, if it survives, then it adds mana. So there's all sorts of different things you could spend that on. Whether it just helps you get rats down a bit faster, right, because it can pay for the generic mana and rats cost, or whether you want to play some slightly more expensive payoff cards, like Mold Shambler is a thing I've seen people try. All of these things are potentially like quite interesting. So that's a good development for the black-green version of the deck, but I haven't had a chance to test that out yet. But it's something I'm definitely interested in trying. So yeah, so for today, most of the information will stick with this Jund version. So let me know what you think, especially about the Cavern Whisperer, because all the other changes are obviously very straightforward, but the addition of this 4/4 menace is a bit more interesting. So yeah, that's all the information I have for today. This is Life ITCG signing out.